People always talk about fragrances like there's a clear winner. Designer fragrances on one side, Middle Eastern fragrances on the other. One is weak, one is beast mode. And I used to think that way too, at least at some point, because that's how the conversation usually goes online. But the more time I spent actually wearing fragrances and not just smelling them once or watching rankings, the more I realized that argument skips over a lot of context. So, what you're seeing here are just some of my favorites, the very bottles I've spent enough time with to understand how they actually behave in real life. And this video is really just me sharing those thoughts. I mean, no rush, there's no hype, or not trying to sell anything. Just bottles on the table and an honest conversation. Let's start with the designer side. This is Issey Miyake Ludize for Home. This Dolce& Gabbana light blue EDT. These are fragrances I reach for when I want something clean and effortless. They're fresh, airy, easy to wear, and they don't get in the way of your day. These fragrances don't push. They don't demand attention. They don't try to fill a room. And that's not because they're weak. That's because they're designed to fit in to the daily life without friction. Drakkar Noir. This sits in an interesting place here. It's a classic, and yes, it's been reformulated over the years. But the idea behind it is still very clear: smooth, familiar, masculine, and comfortable. This is the kind of fragrance that's more about being pleasant and wearable than being loud. Ralph Lauren Paul Black and Coach Black feel similar in that sense. Darker than fresh scents, sure, but still controlled. I mean, still polite, still designed to be worn around other people without causing problems. And this is something people don't always consider. A lot of designer fragrances are made to be worn by millions of people in a lot of situations, in closed spaces. That reality shapes how they're built. Now, when people say designer fragrances are weak, they usually point to these kinds of scents. And I get it. If what you're looking for is projection and intensity, these aren't chasing that goal. But designer brands absolutely know how to make strong fragrances. I mean, like this Versace Eros or Versace Eros Flame, which need no introduction. Stronger with You Intensely is another one I reach for when I want something richer. Sweet, heavy, long lasting. This fragrance stays on skin, stays on clothes, and stays noticeable. So, strength isn't something designer brands can do, it's something they choose where to place. And this is where the Middle Eastern side starts to make more sense. When you look at the Middle Eastern fragrances, again, just some of my favorites, you start to notice that strength shows up much earlier in the lineup. Hatafa Khamra is a good example. Sweet, thick, warm, and unapologetic. This fragrance is designed to linger. It doesn't try to disappear quietly. Club de Nuit Intense Man is another one. This fragrance stays on skin, on clothes, sometimes longer than you expect. And yes, it's inspired by a familiar DNA, and we all know that. But longevity doesn't come from copying a smell. Longevity comes from how dense a fragrance is built and how much space it's allowed to take. Al Haramain Amber Oud Extreme pushes that idea even further. It's heavy, it's rich, it's resinous. This fragrance feels deliberate. It's meant to be noticed. Then we have Afnan 9 p.m. Elixir, Supremacy Collector's Edition, and Supremacy in Heaven. I mean, different styles, different moves, but the same general philosophy: impact first. These fragrances don't tiptoe around you, they show up and they stay present. Before I go further, a quick pause here. If you're enjoying this kind of content, just focusing on the bottles, the fragrances, and the real experience, that's really what this channel is about. I'm intentionally keeping the camera on the fragrances and not on myself. No heavy edits and no exaggerated reactions, no facial expressions doing the talking. Just the sense and the thoughts behind them. If that's your vibe, feel free to subscribe. I'm trying to bring back that old YouTube feel where it's more about understanding than performing. Now back to the point. This is usually where the conversation online turns into, huh, well, of course, Middle Eastern fragrances are stronger, they're just dupes. But that explanation doesn't really hold up. You can copy a scent profile and still make it weak. I'll say it again. You can copy a scent profile and still make it weak. You can make something original and still keep it light. Performance is a formulation choice and not an accident. What's really happening is that many Middle Eastern brands put density and longevity into more affordable releases, while designer brands often reserve that level of performance for higher priced bottles. So when someone compares a lower priced designer fragrance to a similarly priced Middle Eastern fragrance, they're not comparing quality. They're comparing design priorities at that price point. Designer fragrances at lower prices often focus on versatility, cleanliness, and mass appeal. Middle Eastern fragrances at lower prices often focus on richness, longevity, and presence. Neither approach is wrong. They just solve different problems. And once you see it that way, the argument starts to come down. Because now it's not about which side is better. It becomes a personal question. Do you want something that blends into your day and never feels out of place? Or do you want something that announces itself and stays with you for hours? Do you want comfort or do you want presence? And just as important, how much are you willing to pay for either one? This is the part I think matters most. At the end of the day, none of these bottles are buying themselves. You are. You're the one spending the money. You're the one wearing the fragrance. You're the one living with it for hours. If the brand name matters to you, that's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with enjoying heritage, design, or reputation. If the scent itself matters more to you, how it smells, how it lasts, how it makes you feel, that's also completely fine. Most people are somewhere in between, whether they realize it or not. And once you accept that, a lot of the noise fades away. You stop chasing beast mode just because the internet tells you to. You stop avoiding lighter fragrances just because someone calls them weak. You stop buying emotionally and start choosing intentionally. That's when the fragrance stops being a competition and starts being personal. Because a fragrance doesn't need to be loud to be good, and it doesn't need to be expensive to be meaningful. What matters is whether it fits your life, your routine, and your taste. Some days I'll reach for Easy Miyake or light blue. Some days I'll reach for Hamra or amber oud. And some days I'll want something right in between. And that balance, that's the part people don't talk about enough. So at the end of the day, this isn't about designer versus Middle Eastern. It's not about hype. It's not about winning arguments online. It's about you understanding your own preferences and making choices that actually make sense for you. And if this way of talking about fragrance resonates with you, slower, more thoughtful, focused on the scent instead of the spectacle, then I think you'll enjoy what's coming next. If you haven't already, consider subscribing. I'll keep the focus where it should be on the fragrances, the experience, and the thinking behind them. And that's really it. Thank you for watching and see you on my next video.